It's a question that has haunted royal watchers for decades, whispered in the corners of Buckingham Palace and dissected endlessly by historians, biographers, and gossip columnists alike. Why did Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, one of the most iconic royal couples of the 20th century, reportedly sleep in separate beds? It seems inconceivable. We imagine true love as closeness, as warmth, as intimacy. Yet for this legendary pair, the reality appears far stranger. And now, after years of silence, someone finally speaks. Or at least, someone finally hints at the truth. The revelations are shocking, uncomfortable, and, in many ways, challenge everything we thought we knew about the British monarchy. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine being in the heart of the palace at night. The grandeur, the history, the tapestries that have seen generations of kings and queens. Silence fills the halls, punctuated only by the occasional echo of footsteps or the faint rustle of royal garments. In the king's or queen's bedroom, we might picture candlelight or, in modern times, soft lamps, and a shared bed, a symbol of partnership and love. But history tells a different story. It whispers of separate beds, of cold nights, of distances unexplained, even as the public witnessed the couple's unwavering unity at ceremonies, banquets, and state functions. How could they maintain such a front, yet live so separately? What could have driven such a private, intimate division between two people who shared decades together? And more importantly, what does this tell us about the untold realities of palace life, about the human complexities behind the crowns? Before you jump to conclusions, it's crucial to understand the context. The idea of separate beds in royal bedrooms is not unique to Elizabeth and Philip. Historically, separate beds were more common than we might imagine. Early 20th century norms, particularly among the upper classes, often emphasized propriety and privacy over shared sleep. Yet for a couple constantly in the public eye, subject to scrutiny, speculation, and relentless press coverage, this arrangement takes on a more layered meaning. It was more than a lifestyle choice. It became a symbol, one that the royal family rarely explained and the press hesitated to probe in depth. What were the true motivations? Tradition, personal preference, health issues, or something far more unsettling? The answers are complex, sometimes contradictory, and often deeply human. Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, has always been a figure of fascination. A naval officer, a prince of Greece and Denmark, a husband who reportedly could be sharp-tongued and intimidating, yet also charming and witty. His marriage to Elizabeth was forged during turbulent times, encompassing war, political upheaval, and the growing scrutiny of a global public. He was a man of discipline, of duty, of strict routines. Some insiders suggest he adhered to old-fashioned ideas of personal space and boundaries. Others hint at temperamental eccentricities, peculiar habits, and standards that might seem alien or even unpleasant to those outside the palace walls. Could these personal traits have influenced his sleeping arrangements? And what does this reveal about his marriage, his intimacy, and his character? Meanwhile, Queen Elizabeth herself was a figure of remarkable composure and duty. She was steadfast, unflinching, and profoundly aware of her responsibilities, not just to her family, but to her nation and the entire Commonwealth. Marriage, love, and personal comfort often had to coexist with royal protocol and image. Perhaps the decision to maintain separate bedrooms was a compromise, a practical solution to reconcile personal needs with public expectations. Yet, whispers persisted. Close aides and palace insiders, speaking anonymously, have occasionally hinted at tensions, small domestic conflicts, and private irritations. Some accounts describe Philip as difficult to live with, meticulous to the point of obsession, and, according to certain memoirs, at times socially abrasive. Could these factors have contributed to the distance between the couple? Could the simple act of sleeping apart be a subtle reflection of deeper, unspoken discord? As historians have dug into this question, they often encounter a frustrating wall of secrecy. Official biographies, authorized documentaries, and royal interviews paint a carefully curated picture, one of harmony, mutual respect, and steadfast partnership. But unofficial accounts, diaries of courtiers, letters, and memoirs hint at a more complicated reality. They suggest that behind the carefully staged public appearances, the couple navigated tensions, irritations, and perhaps even frustrations. What really happened behind closed doors? And why has it taken so long for anyone to even hint at the truth? This is where the story becomes not just about royal etiquette, but about human behavior. The negotiation between love, duty, and personal boundaries, magnified to the extreme by life in one of the world's most scrutinized households. And then there's Princess Anne. Known for her candor and bluntness, she has often been called the most outspoken member of the royal family. Unlike others who carefully measure every word, she has a reputation for honesty, sometimes brutally so. Over the years, she has occasionally provided glimpses into the private dynamics of her family, though always with restraint. Yet now, hints have surfaced suggesting she might have addressed one of the most persistent royal mysteries: why her father, Prince Philip, and her mother, Queen Elizabeth, reportedly did not share a bed for decades. The notion itself is shocking to the public, and the context she provides, or seems poised to provide, could reframe the way the world views this iconic couple. What is she revealing? Why now? And what do her words tell us about the personal and emotional undercurrents of royal life? Perhaps most striking is the emotional weight of these revelations. The story is not merely one of sleeping arrangements or domestic habits. It touches on intimacy, respect, boundaries, and the complexity of human relationships under intense public scrutiny. Imagine being a young princess, observing your parents' marriage through the lens of both admiration and curiosity. Imagine trying to understand the reasons behind your father's behaviors, your mother's decisions, and the subtle tensions that might ripple through your family life. The human drama is immense, and for audiences, the intrigue is irresistible because it promises not just scandal, but insight into the hidden realities of royalty, the ways that power, duty, and personality collide behind the palace walls. By now, you may be wondering, what exactly happened? Was this separation a matter of personal comfort, or something more? Did Prince Philip harbor personal dislikes, habits, or quirks that created friction? Was it a reflection of a deeper emotional divide, or merely a practical choice for health or routine? And crucially, what did Princess Anne mean when she hinted at her father's unpleasantness? These questions are at the heart of the story, and the answers, when fully revealed, will shock, surprise, and perhaps even unsettle you. They reveal that even in a marriage defined by duty, love, and public admiration, the private realities can be far more complicated than anyone imagines. As we journey through this story, we'll explore decades of palace life, anecdotes from close aides, stories that have never reached public ears, and insights into the complex personalities that defined one of history's most famous couples. We'll examine the norms and expectations that shaped their choices and the emotional landscapes they navigated behind closed doors. We'll also trace Princess Anne's perspective, her candid observations, and the subtle truths she reveals about family dynamics, marriage, and personal boundaries. And we'll do so with drama, insight, and curiosity, because this is not just history. It is a human story magnified to royal proportions. So why does this matter now? Why, after decades, are these stories emerging, and why should we pay attention? The answer lies in both the passage of time and the public's enduring fascination with royalty. With Prince Philip's passing and Queen Elizabeth's legacy firmly cemented in history, the family's private life becomes an object of curiosity, reflection, and speculation. Audiences crave understanding, not simply scandal, but context, meaning, and humanity behind the icons. This story provides a lens into how love, duty, personality, and personal boundaries coexist in one of the most scrutinized households in history. It's about power, yes, but also about vulnerability, compromise, and the sometimes painful realities of long-term partnership. But perhaps the most tantalizing question remains: what exactly did Princess Anne reveal, or imply, about her father? The hints are sharp, provocative, and emotionally charged. They suggest a narrative far more human and far more complicated than the polished images we have long admired. And just as importantly, They set the stage for a series of revelations, anecdotes, and insider insights that will reshape the story of Elizabeth and Philip's marriage in ways you never imagined. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace looks serene in photographs, a symbol of tradition, wealth, and power. But anyone who has spent time within its walls knows the truth. It is alive in a way that outsiders rarely comprehend. Hushed footsteps echo in the hallways, servants move with quiet precision, and rooms are constantly maintained, polished, and observed. Life in Buckingham Palace is like life in a meticulously choreographed theater. Every movement intentional, every glance calculated, every secret hidden just beneath the surface. And among these secrets lies the question that has long puzzled royal watchers. What were the private dynamics of Elizabeth and Philip's bedroom? From the outside, the couple appeared inseparable. Their public personas were flawless. State events, royal tours, banquets, and ceremonies showcased unity, grace, and mutual respect. Yet behind closed doors, things were different. Those closest to the couple have often hinted that life inside the palace was governed not just by duty, but by intricate personal rules, rituals, quirks, and boundaries that might seem strange or even alien to outsiders. One of these rules, whispered about but never openly discussed, was the separate sleeping arrangements. Why separate beds? For years, royal commentators suggested practicality, Philip's naval routines, health considerations, or simply the desire for personal space. Others hinted at the presence of personal irritations or domestic conflicts that made shared sleeping impossible. But few dared to probe further, partly out of respect, partly out of fear. The palace, after all, is not just a home, it is an institution. And institutions guard their secrets fiercely. Yet the very fact that so many wondered, speculated, and questioned speaks to the magnetic fascination of these private details. It's impossible to understand Philip and Elizabeth's choices without understanding Philip himself. He was a man of exacting standards. Stories from aides, biographers, and insiders describe a person who could be sharp-tongued, impatient, and occasionally abrasive. Some describe him as having little tolerance for behavior he deemed inefficient or improper, particularly in the private sphere. The smallest irritations could provoke reactions that, to outsiders, might appear disproportionate. Yet beneath the strict exterior, there were also glimpses of warmth, humor, and loyalty, a complex personality, shaped by displacement, war, and the burden of duty. He was a man who had lived through exile as a child, lost family members, and grown into a life dominated by expectations and responsibility. Could these factors have made him particularly particular about his private life? Possibly. Elizabeth, in contrast, was composed, unflappable, and acutely aware of the weight of her role. Marriage for her was intertwined with public duty in ways most people cannot imagine. To maintain the monarchy's image, she often had to balance personal feelings with public expectations, navigating a life that few could comprehend. In this context, personal comfort sometimes took a back seat to duty. And yet, reports suggest she was not entirely indifferent to her domestic life, nor to the dynamics with her husband. She managed, with precision and care, the complex choreography of a royal household while simultaneously fulfilling the duties of queen, wife, and mother. Even as the couple navigated public life, the private world of the palace remained largely hidden. Staff members, some speaking anonymously decades later, describe late-night routines, whispers in the corridors, and subtle signs of tension or discomfort between the couple. There were rules about when the doors were closed, how the rooms were arranged, and who was allowed into the private chambers. Every detail was governed by tradition and protocol. But within these walls, personality clashes and preferences could influence the minutest of details, like where one sleeps at night. Insiders often suggest that the separate beds were not merely about comfort, but about a more profound emotional dynamic. Philip's quirks and sometimes brusque behavior may have created an environment in which shared sleep was less appealing, even intolerable. Yet, publicly, the royal family remained the image of unity, demonstrating to the world that love and partnership endured despite any private differences. For decades, the media accepted this narrative. Separate beds were mentioned lightly, almost humorously, in passing articles and biographies, never as a source of scandal. But for those observing closely, it was a detail pregnant with meaning, a silent acknowledgement of personality clashes, of private boundaries, and perhaps even of emotional distance. The question becomes even more fascinating when seen through the eyes of Princess Anne. As the only daughter, she had a front-row seat to her parents' marriage. She witnessed the complexities firsthand, moments of tenderness, episodes of tension, and the small, everyday negotiations that defined life in the palace. While she rarely spoke publicly about intimate family details, those closest to her suggest that she was aware of the reasons behind her parents' separation at night. And when she finally hinted at what she observed, the statements, careful, measured, yet cutting, offered a glimpse into a side of Philip that the public rarely saw. Some describe her words as a mixture of exasperation and understanding, acknowledging both her father's strictness and his sometimes difficult nature. Yet even these insights raise further questions. Was Philip truly difficult, or did his strictness mask vulnerability? Did Elizabeth acquiesce to separate sleeping arrangements out of necessity, practicality, or self-preservation? And how much of the narrative was influenced by the performative nature of royal life? Always observed, always under scrutiny, always constrained by duty. These questions underscore a key reality. Royal marriages are never merely about romance or intimacy. They are social contracts, shaped by history, protocol, and expectations that go far beyond personal preference. As we examine these layers, it's impossible to ignore the human element. Separate beds, strict routines, and private irritations may seem trivial to some, but they are a lens into the inner workings of a family under immense pressure. They reveal how personal habits intersect with public duty, how boundaries are drawn, and how love and loyalty can coexist with discomfort and tension. The story of Elizabeth and Philip's sleeping arrangements is, in many ways, a story about human negotiation, the compromises, frustrations, and private rules that allow two people to share a life, even when full comfort is impossible. And then there's the intrigue of revelation. Princess Anne, known for her candid demeanor, suggests that the reasons go beyond simple preference. While she never fully spells it out, insiders hint that her comments carry a sting, a truth that makes the public reevaluate Philip not just as a public figure, but as a husband and father. This subtle exposure, framed in restraint yet dripping with implication, adds an entirely new layer of drama. It is the beginning of a narrative that promises tension, emotion, and unexpected insight. By now, you may be asking, what specific behaviors or habits made Philip so challenging, according to those closest to the family? What moments in the palace nights defined the private reality of their marriage? And how did Elizabeth manage these dynamics while maintaining her public poise? The answers are layered, sometimes contradictory, and deeply human. They reveal a side of royal life that is rarely visible. A world of small irritations, unspoken rules, and complex negotiations that govern even the most intimate spaces. As Chapter 1 closes, one thing becomes clear. The story of Elizabeth and Philip's separate sleeping arrangements is not just a matter of furniture or routine. It is a story of personalities, power, and private boundaries. It is a story of human complexity played out on a stage of unprecedented scrutiny. And it is a story that begins to reveal truths that many have suspected but few dared to articulate, truths that Princess Anne, in her own careful way, has begun to expose. But as we move into the next chapter, we will uncover the first of many surprising anecdotes from those who lived inside the palace. Moments of tension, discomfort, and quiet rebellion that paint a picture of royal life far different from the polished public image. These stories are not just revelations. They are windows into a world few have ever glimpsed, a world where every choice, even where one sleeps at night, carries meaning, consequence, and drama. And what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about life behind the palace doors, and about Prince Philip himself. Few figures in modern royal history command attention quite like Prince Philip. His reputation was forged in battles and banquets, naval traditions and royal tours, but perhaps most intriguingly, in the private corridors of Buckingham Palace itself. To outsiders, he was charming, witty, and a devoted consort. But to those who lived within the palace walls, Philip could be exacting, unpredictable, and, at times, infuriating. These private dimensions, often hinted at, occasionally documented, but rarely discussed openly, hold the key to understanding one of the most mysterious aspects of his marriage: the separate beds he maintained from Queen Elizabeth. Imagine a day in the life of the Duke. Rising early, inspecting the palace grounds, or attending to naval matters, Philip followed routines with military precision. Every hour had its purpose, every action its consequence. Staff members recount tales of his punctuality bordering on obsession, of demands for order that could be bewildering to outsiders. If the room isn't arranged just so, one aide recalled decades later, he would notice. And he wouldn't just notice. He'd fix it himself, sometimes leaving a staff member scrambling to meet his exacting standards. It was a man who expected perfection not only from himself, but from everyone around him. And while this might seem a minor quirk in the context of a global figure, in the intimate space of a marriage, it could create tension, irritation, and distance. Elizabeth, for her part, was not naive to these tendencies. She had grown up observing royal life and understood that marriage in the monarchy was as much about partnership as it was about negotiation. Yet even she, the famously composed queen, had to navigate Philip's strong will, his meticulous habits, and his occasional abrasiveness. A marriage with Philip required patience, adaptability, and an unspoken acknowledgement of boundaries. It is here that the separate bedrooms begin to make sense. Not merely as a matter of preference, but as a practical and emotional necessity. Stories from palace insiders paint vivid pictures of Philip's temperament. He could be charming and playful one moment and coldly critical the next. On certain nights, when tensions ran high, the couple would retreat to their private chambers, not necessarily in anger, but in quiet acknowledgement of their differences. Separate beds allowed each to maintain personal space, a buffer against irritations that, in shared quarters, might escalate. While it may sound mundane, this small decision, who sleeps where, offers profound insight into the dynamics of their marriage. And yet, there was more at play than mere habit. Philip's upbringing, marked by displacement and early loss, shaped his perceptions of privacy, control, and personal boundaries. Born into Greek and Danish royalty, exiled from his homeland as a child, he carried the imprint of instability and responsibility from an early age. His sense of order, discipline, and self-containment were not just preferences, they were coping mechanisms, developed to navigate a world that often felt unpredictable. To outsiders, this might appear cold or rigid, but within the palace, it was part of the complex tapestry that defined his character. Meanwhile, Queen Elizabeth's perspective adds another layer. For decades, she balanced the demands of monarchy with the intricate realities of marriage. She was, according to many historians, pragmatic in her approach, understanding that personal comfort sometimes had to yield to duty and decorum. Yet she was not passive. Her approach to marriage was deliberate, calculated, and, in many ways, emotionally intelligent. By negotiating boundaries, like separate sleeping arrangements, she preserved her own sense of agency while maintaining the public image of a devoted partnership. This delicate balance required awareness, tact, and an acceptance of certain imperfections that would challenge any ordinary marriage, let alone one under global scrutiny. Princess Anne's observations illuminate the emotional undercurrents behind these choices. Unlike other family members who carefully guarded their statements, and was known for her honesty. While she rarely spoke directly about intimate marital details, those close to her suggest she had an acute awareness of her father's personality, his exacting standards, occasional abrasiveness, and private eccentricities. When she hinted at Philip's difficult traits, it was not an attack but an acknowledgement of reality, a nuanced observation that allowed audiences to glimpse a side of him rarely seen outside the palace. The juxtaposition of Philip's strictness and Elizabeth's composure created a fascinating dynamic. Publicly, they appeared inseparable, a model of royal devotion and stability. Privately, the couple navigated tensions, personality clashes, and domestic irritations that demanded subtle management. The separate beds, seemingly mundane, became a symbol of this negotiation. A small, silent compromise that allowed both individuals to maintain personal space without disrupting public perception. It was, in many ways, a masterclass in emotional diplomacy conducted behind closed doors. Staff anecdotes further illustrate the Duke's private intensity. Some describe late-night inspections of rooms, where he would check schedules, correspondence, and household arrangements. Others recount moments of sudden irritation, often triggered by what outsiders might consider minor infractions: a misplaced chair, a disrupted routine, a lapse in protocol. These episodes, while seemingly small, offer insight into why shared sleep might have been unappealing. In a home where every detail was scrutinized and where perfection was expected, the privacy of a separate bedroom was both practical and psychologically necessary. Yet the story is not one-dimensional. Philip was not merely difficult. He was also caring, loyal, and deeply devoted to his family in ways that might not be obvious at first glance. His strictness coexisted with acts of humor, warmth, and generosity that defined his personal relationships. The separate bedrooms were therefore not necessarily a sign of emotional distance, but rather a negotiated space where both partners could coexist without friction. It was a choice that balanced personality, habit, and the relentless demands of public life. A choice that, while unusual to outsiders, made sense in the extraordinary context of royal life. By examining these patterns, we begin to understand the human side of a marriage often idealized in public. Even in a relationship defined by history, duty, and global admiration, personal quirks, preferences, and boundaries matter. And as Princess Anne's comments suggest, these private truths are not trivial. They are part of the story that humanizes a couple often seen as larger than life. The narrative challenges assumptions, confronts stereotypes, and reveals that even iconic figures navigate the messy, nuanced realities of love, habit, and compatibility. But as this chapter closes, the intrigue deepens. What exactly were the habits, routines, or personality traits that made Philip's presence challenging in shared quarters? How did Elizabeth navigate these subtleties without disrupting the public facade? And what did Princess Anne observe that the public has never known? These questions set the stage for the next chapter, a journey into the most private moments of palace life, the night routines, and the small details that reveal the true emotional landscape of one of history's most famous marriages. What comes next will pull back the curtain even further, offering anecdotes, insights, and revelations that show not just why the beds were separate, but what these choices say about intimacy, compromise, and the hidden tensions that quietly shaped life behind palace doors. And what comes next will shock you, challenge assumptions, and hint at truths that even decades of biographies have only partially captured. The palace at night is not quiet in the way one might imagine. It is alive with hushed movements, careful whispers, and rituals that maintain order while concealing secrets. While the public sees grandeur, ceremonies, and impeccable protocol, the reality of private life inside Buckingham Palace is far more complex and far more revealing. For Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, nights were not merely a time for rest. They were a carefully managed space of routines, preferences, and subtle tensions, reflecting both their personalities and the extraordinary pressures of royal life. Imagine the couple retiring to their private quarters after a long day of official duties. State banquets, ceremonial inspections, or diplomatic meetings may have ended hours earlier, but the palace itself never truly sleeps. Footsteps echo down long corridors. Staff move silently to attend to household needs. The soft hum of lamps and heaters marks the quiet rhythm of nightly routines. It is a world that blends tradition, etiquette, and personal habits. And within this world, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh had carved out a particular structure that reflected both personal preference and psychological necessity. For Prince Philip, routine was everything. Naval training had instilled in him a discipline that extended far beyond professional duties. According to aides, he had specific habits for every hour of the day: precise meal times, regimented schedules, and even minute attention to the positioning of furniture and belongings. His private time, especially nighttime, was approached with the same precision. Stories suggest that even seemingly trivial disruptions could provoke irritation, whether it was a misplaced item or a change in the expected order. In a marriage, these traits could create friction, particularly when extended over decades of cohabitation. Elizabeth, on the other hand, had her own approach to these routines. While composed and adaptable, she was acutely aware of her husband's tendencies and the need to maintain a sense of personal space. Separate sleeping arrangements provided a buffer, a way to preserve emotional equilibrium, minimize conflict, and respect personal boundaries without compromising public appearances. It was not a solution born of indifference or distance, but of careful negotiation, a way to reconcile the demands of personality, duty, and partnership. The impact of these arrangements extended beyond the couple themselves. Staff members, many of whom lived and worked within the palace for years, provide rare glimpses into the nuanced environment of nighttime routines. Some describe the Duke inspecting rooms late into the evening, ensuring everything was orderly before retiring. Others recall subtle signs of tension between the couple, brief moments of irritation, silent exchanges, or gestures that, while private, revealed undercurrents of emotion. These moments were often fleeting, but over decades, they created a complex pattern of behavior that shaped the emotional rhythm of the household. Yet the story is not only about discipline or tension, it is also about adaptation. Elizabeth and Philip developed strategies to coexist, balancing individual preferences with mutual respect. Separate beds, carefully maintained routines, and subtle personal rules allowed them to navigate decades of marriage under intense public scrutiny. What may seem unusual or even cold to outsiders was, in reality, a pragmatic solution, a reflection of human adaptability in the face of extraordinary circumstances. Princess Anne's perspective adds a crucial layer to this narrative. As an observer of her parents' private world, she had first-hand insight into their emotional and practical negotiations. Those close to her suggest she recognized both her father's exacting nature and her mother's strategic pragmatism. While she rarely shared intimate details publicly, hints from interviews and anecdotes suggest that she understood the rationale behind the separate sleeping arrangements. In her view, the choice was less about emotional distance than about managing personalities, maintaining harmony, and preserving the dignity of the household. But even with such adaptations, the palace nights were not without drama. Anecdotes from staff hint at small but revealing conflicts. Episodes where Philip's expectations clashed with Elizabeth's needs. Moments where tension simmered but was contained by mutual awareness. These stories are not scandalous in the traditional sense, but they illuminate the subtle complexities of a marriage conducted under global scrutiny. Every decision, every boundary, every personal preference carried weight, shaping the emotional landscape of the household and influencing the private lives of everyone within its walls. Consider, for instance, the story of an aide who observed Philip's meticulous nightly routine. He would check the alignment of chairs, ensure the curtains were drawn just so, and verify that the heating and lighting were adjusted precisely according to preference. Any deviation, however minor, could prompt a quiet correction or a sharp remark. Elizabeth, accustomed to these standards, often accommodated them with grace, but the repeated exposure to such exacting demands could, in ordinary circumstances, become a source of tension. Separate bedrooms allowed each individual to retreat, decompress, and maintain a sense of control over their personal space without escalating conflicts. The human element here is essential. Even in the most iconic marriages, differences in personality, habits, and coping mechanisms influence the dynamics of intimacy. Philip and Elizabeth's choice to maintain separate sleeping arrangements reflects an understanding of these differences, a practical acknowledgement that harmony sometimes requires boundaries. In this light, what might appear as coldness or distance becomes a form of emotional intelligence, a strategy for coexistence under extraordinary pressures. And yet, the intrigue deepens when we consider Princess Anne's observations. Her hints about her father's unpleasantness do not emerge from casual gossip. They are rooted in decades of observation, of witnessing the interplay between personality and private habit. Anne's candor provides a rare window into the emotional truths of royal life, highlighting the tension between public image and private reality. The separate beds were not merely furniture. They were symbols of negotiation, compromise, and the nuanced management of a high-profile marriage. By the end of Chapter 3, one thing becomes clear. Nighttime in the palace is never simply about rest. It is about control, personality, and emotional strategy. It is about navigating decades of marriage under the constant gaze of the public eye, balancing duty with desire, and managing the subtleties of human behavior in extraordinary circumstances. And as the chapter closes, the stakes rise even higher. What comes next is an exploration of the first truly shocking anecdotes from those who lived closest to the Duke and Duchess. Moments that reveal not just routines, but emotional friction, private disputes, and glimpses of a reality that few outsiders have ever seen. Secrets that, until now, have remained hidden behind palace walls. Secrets that may challenge the way we have long imagined one of history's most famous marriages. And what comes next will show that even small, private choices, like where to sleep, can carry profound meaning, shaping the lives of everyone in the household in ways that ripple far beyond the bedroom. Few people have a vantage point like the staff of Buckingham Palace. They move silently through grand halls, tending to duties that seem mundane yet are steeped in ritual, protocol, and sometimes mystery. From housekeepers to valets, they witness the private world of the royals in ways the public never does. Their perspectives provide rare glimpses into the dynamics between Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, especially concerning their separate sleeping arrangements and the tensions that sometimes accompanied them. For decades, palace staff were sworn to secrecy. Loyalty, discretion, and fear of repercussions kept even the most intimate observations confined to whispers in the hallways. Yet, as time passed and some former employees retired or passed away, stories began to emerge. Carefully, cautiously, but with a candidness that often surprises. One recurring theme stands out: Philip's exacting nature. Staff describe a man whose presence was both commanding and intimidating, whose standards were uncompromising, and whose private quirks sometimes created tension even in routine household operations. One former aide recalled nights when Philip would make unexpected inspections of the private quarters. He was not confrontational, but his attention to detail was relentless. Curtains had to hang a certain way, bed linens had to meet precise standards, lighting and temperature needed to be just right. Any deviation was quietly noted, and occasionally corrected with a sharp remark. Elizabeth, accustomed to her husband's high standards, often accommodated them gracefully, but for staff observing these moments, the scenes were a study in discipline, control, and subtle tension. Separate bedrooms, in this context, emerge not merely as a choice of convenience, but as a form of emotional management. By retreating to separate spaces, both Elizabeth and Philip could maintain personal boundaries, decompress from daily pressures, and avoid potential conflict. To outsiders, it may appear unusual or even cold. To those who understand the human psyche, it is a strategy, a compromise, and a method of coexistence in a life where personal and public pressures are inseparable. Another layer of insight comes from anecdotal evidence about the couple's nighttime routines. Some staff describe Philip remaining up later than Elizabeth, engaged in personal projects, correspondence, or private study. He valued solitude, reflection, and uninterrupted space, qualities that clashed with shared sleeping arrangements. Elizabeth, balancing the weight of her responsibilities, often retired earlier, valuing rest and recovery. These habits, while seemingly trivial, contributed to the practical logic of separate bedrooms. What appears as distance may have been a carefully orchestrated form of harmony, a way to maintain mutual respect while allowing individual needs to be met. Yet staff accounts hint at more than practicality. There are subtle indications of tension, irritation, and even emotional friction. One long-serving housekeeper noted that small disagreements, often over trivial matters, could escalate if boundaries were not maintained. It wasn't about love or hate, she explained. It was about space, dignity, and maintaining order. Sometimes you could feel the undercurrent of strain in the room, even when everyone was perfectly polite. These observations suggest that separate beds were not merely an idiosyncrasy. They were a buffer, a tool for preserving emotional equilibrium in a household under constant scrutiny. Princess Anne's perspective ties these anecdotes together. Known for her candor, she provides a rare interpretive lens, framing the separate sleeping arrangements as less a matter of conflict and more a reflection of personalities. She hints at her father's demanding nature, his insistence on order, and occasional abrasiveness, while also acknowledging her mother's diplomacy, patience, and pragmatism. Anne's voice adds credibility and emotional depth to the narrative, illustrating that what outsiders perceive as coldness or distance may, in fact, be a sophisticated negotiation of human behavior under extraordinary conditions. The stories from staff also reveal small acts of private rebellion and subtle humanization. A valet recounts how Elizabeth occasionally adjusted the room in ways Philip might notice but ultimately tolerate, a quiet assertion of agency within the strict confines of palace life. Another aide describes moments when Philip would quietly appreciate these gestures, indicating that even within the rigid structure, warmth, humor, and mutual understanding existed. The interplay of rigidity and flexibility, tension and tolerance, is a hallmark of the palace's private world. Consider the symbolism of these separate bedrooms. They are not merely furniture or decoration. They are embodiments of negotiation, compromise, and the careful management of personality and emotion. Each room represents a sanctuary, a space where boundaries are respected and the pressures of public duty are momentarily eased. To ignore their significance is to misunderstand the marriage itself, which was defined not only by public appearances but by the constant balancing of private needs, personalities, and expectations. These revelations also challenge long-standing public narratives. The idealized image of Elizabeth and Philip as a flawless, inseparable couple is complicated by the realities observed by staff. Small tensions, personality quirks, and emotional boundaries were part of daily life. And as Princess Anne subtly points out, the distance in the bedroom was not about dislike, but about navigating these human complexities, a truth that is at once shocking, relatable, and deeply humanizing. But the story does not end with anecdotes of daily routine. The palace is a place where small incidents ripple outward, carrying emotional weight far beyond their immediate context. Staff describe nights where minor irritations could linger, where the management of personality and protocol intersected in unexpected ways, and where choices as simple as sleeping arrangements became loaded with meaning. These moments, observed silently and often forgotten, reveal the intricate dance of power, personality, and emotion that defines royal life. By now, the pattern is clear. The separate beds are more than a curiosity. They are a lens through which to understand marriage, personality, and power in one of history's most scrutinized households. They reflect the interplay between discipline and affection, authority and compromise, public duty and private need. And as the chapter closes, one question looms. What personal traits, habits, or behaviors made these boundaries necessary? What private revelations lie just beyond the reach of staff observation, waiting to be illuminated by those closest to the family? The next chapter promises answers, an exploration of Philip's most unusual quirks, the behaviors that staff and family observed but rarely discussed, and the ways in which these shaped the couple's private lives. And what comes next will bring the story to a level of intimacy and intrigue that no outsider could imagine, details that will challenge assumptions, provoke emotion, and reveal truths that the public has long been denied. Prince Philip was a man of contradictions. Publicly, he was charming, witty, and capable of self-deprecating humor that endeared him to the masses. Privately, however, he was a study in exacting discipline, personal quirks, and sometimes frustrating idiosyncrasies that shaped the daily life of Buckingham Palace. While the public saw a devoted consort, those closest to him, staff, family, and Princess Anne, experienced the other side, the habits, routines, and personal preferences that created both tension and respect within the household. One of Philip's most notable quirks was his obsessive attention to detail. Staff accounts describe how he would inspect rooms multiple times a day, adjusting the positioning of chairs, ensuring personal items were arranged precisely, and even checking the alignment of curtains or lighting. While these behaviors might seem minor, within the private confines of a shared bedroom, they could be taxing. For decades, these habits shaped the household's rhythm, subtly dictating when and how Elizabeth and Philip moved through their private quarters. Sleep, in particular, became a battleground of habit versus necessity. Philip reportedly had rigid routines that demanded quiet, darkness, and a specific environment. Any disruption, however small, could irritate him. Elizabeth, balancing her own needs and the weight of public duty, often accommodated these routines by retiring to her own room or asserting subtle adjustments that respected both her boundaries and Philip's. Separate bedrooms, therefore, were not a matter of emotional distance, but a solution to an ongoing negotiation between personalities, habits, and the pressures of monarchy. Some staff anecdotes reveal unusual nighttime behaviors that are as fascinating as they are humanizing. One retired aide recalled how Philip would sometimes remain awake long after the Queen had retired, reviewing documents, writing letters, or studying naval materials. He valued his solitude, the aide explained. He needed that time to decompress, to think, to plan. Sharing a bed with anyone would have interrupted that rhythm. These stories offer insight into the mental and emotional space Philip required, a space that separate bedrooms conveniently provided. Yet it wasn't just routine that defined him. Philip's personality could be intimidating. He was known for sharp observations, direct speech, and a sometimes abrupt demeanor that could unsettle even seasoned staff. His presence demanded attention and respect, and his habits often reflected a desire for control in a life dominated by public scrutiny. Within the private sphere of marriage, these traits translated into an environment where personal space was not just a preference, but a psychological necessity. Elizabeth's perspective is equally revealing. As queen, she needed to balance her personal needs with the constant demands of duty and public image. Her patience, composure, and diplomacy allowed her to navigate Philip's quirks while maintaining her own sense of agency. The separate bedrooms, in this light, were a practical choice, an unspoken agreement that protected emotional equilibrium, preserved harmony, and allowed both partners to function effectively within the constraints of royal life. Princess Anne's observations bring additional clarity. Known for her bluntness and honesty, she provides a rare lens into the family's private dynamics, and hints at her father's idiosyncrasies, not as judgment, but as recognition of reality. These habits, she suggests, were part of what made separate bedrooms necessary. They reveal a man whose devotion to discipline, precision, and routine coexisted with affection, loyalty, and humor, a complex personality that required understanding, compromise, and boundaries. The palace staff also hint at moments when Philip's quirks extended into surprisingly human territory. Despite his demanding nature, he could be generous, thoughtful, and subtly affectionate. Some stories recount small acts of consideration, adjustments made quietly for Elizabeth's comfort, moments of humor that broke tension, or gestures that demonstrated care while respecting his personal boundaries. These anecdotes suggest that the separate bedrooms were not a reflection of emotional detachment, but a nuanced form of coexistence that balanced individuality with partnership. But these habits also had consequences. Staff described the emotional undercurrent that accompanied Philip's routines: tension, anticipation, and occasional silent frustration. While outward appearances remained composed, the internal dynamics of the household were shaped by these small but powerful behaviors. Separate bedrooms provided a buffer, a way to preserve dignity, reduce conflict, and maintain the delicate equilibrium required in a household constantly observed by the world. Consider, too, the symbolism of Philip's quirks. They reflect a life shaped by displacement, responsibility, and historical context. Born into Greek and Danish royalty, exiled in childhood, and thrust into the pressures of British monarchy, Philip's meticulous habits were part of a broader effort to exert control over an unpredictable world. The bedrooms, the routines, and the private rules were extensions of this effort, a structure that allowed both him and Elizabeth to navigate decades of public duty while maintaining personal boundaries. By the end of Chapter 5, a critical realization emerges. The Duke's quirks were not eccentricities for their own sake. They were the building blocks of a private system designed to preserve order, emotional stability, and personal space within a high-pressure marriage. They help explain why separate bedrooms were not a mere anomaly, but a carefully negotiated solution, a reflection of personalities, emotional needs, and practical strategy. And yet, as we move to the next chapter, one lingering question intensifies. What personal habits or boundaries push these arrangements from routine into secrecy? What were the moments that staff, family, and insiders witnessed that added emotional weight to these choices? The answers will take us deeper into the palace's private world, revealing behaviors, tensions, and small acts of human negotiation that no biography or documentary has fully captured. What comes next will expose the first truly intimate and emotionally charged anecdotes from Princess and herself, a window into the family life behind the royal facade. And what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about Philip, Elizabeth, and the private realities that shaped one of history's most enduring royal marriages. Few people have had as front row a seat to royal life as Princess Anne. Unlike journalists, biographers, or palace staff, she experienced her family's private dynamics firsthand. She witnessed the triumphs, the tensions, and the subtle negotiations that shaped the household behind Buckingham Palace's gilded walls. And when it comes to the question of why Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth reportedly maintained separate bedrooms, Anne's perspective is not just illuminating, it is essential. From an early age, Anne was acutely aware of her father's exacting nature. As a child, she observed how he enforced rules, demanded precision, and maintained a meticulous control over his environment. His routines were rigid, his standards high, and his expectations often unspoken yet unmistakable. She saw the impact of these traits on her mother, on household staff, and on the rhythm of daily life. Some nights were calm and orderly. Others carried an unspoken tension, subtle yet palpable. For a young princess, these moments were formative, offering lessons in negotiation, observation, and the nuances of human behavior under extraordinary circumstances. Anne's insights are often candid, unfiltered by the desire to maintain a public image. She has a reputation for speaking blunt truths while balancing respect and discretion. This combination allows her observations to carry weight. When she hints at her father's unpleasantness or notes his quirks, it is not gossip. It is context, reflection, and sometimes emotional honesty. Her perspective provides a window into the reasons behind private decisions, like the separate bedrooms, that would otherwise remain mysterious to the outside world. Consider the bedtime rituals and observed. She noted that Philip often stayed up later than her mother, engaged in reading, correspondence, or reviewing naval matters. Elizabeth, by contrast, had her own schedules and needs, often prioritizing rest and recuperation over late-night activity. This divergence, while seemingly minor, created a natural separation that extended into the bedroom. Separate beds were not imposed by conflict. They were an adaptation, a compromise that allowed each individual to maintain personal space and preserve emotional equilibrium. And also recalls moments when her father's strictness extended into the minutiae of domestic life. Even small deviations from expected routines, misaligned furniture, changes in lighting, or minor lapses in protocol could trigger irritation. Elizabeth, ever composed and aware of the larger context, often accommodated these tendencies with grace. To outsiders, this dynamic might appear unusual or even harsh. To those living it, it was a negotiated balance, a subtle form of coexistence that preserved both dignity and harmony within the household. Yet Anne's reflections go beyond mere observation of routines. She recognizes the emotional undertones that shaped her parents' private life. The separate bedrooms were a manifestation of personalities, a practical solution to the challenges of coexisting under intense scrutiny. They were also symbolic, representing boundaries, mutual respect, and the acknowledgement of personal needs within a high-pressure environment. For Anne, these choices offered insight into her parents' humanity, their strategies for managing conflict, and the ways in which love and partnership could exist alongside differences in temperament. Staff anecdotes support Anne's perspective. Former aides describe how Philip valued solitude, control, and uninterrupted personal space, while Elizabeth prioritized rest, composure, and emotional balance. The bedrooms, therefore, became more than functional spaces. They were sanctuaries, buffers against friction, and arenas where personalities could coexist without compromise to public image. Anne's observations tie these threads together, revealing how private dynamics influenced not just personal comfort, but the overall functioning of the royal household, and also reflects on her own role as an observer. Growing up with parents under constant scrutiny, she learned the importance of discretion, perception, and emotional intelligence. She understood that personal quirks, minor irritations, and private boundaries were part of life behind palace doors. The separate bedrooms were a lesson in negotiation, compromise, and the management of personality, a lesson that shaped her understanding of relationships, duty, and personal space. Interestingly, Anne notes that Philip's quirks were often paired with warmth, humor, and moments of affection that balanced his exacting nature. These contradictions made the separation in bedrooms not a sign of emotional distance, but a carefully negotiated equilibrium. The Duke and Duchess maintained love, respect, and partnership, while also preserving the personal autonomy necessary for a long, high-pressure marriage. Anne's observations reveal the delicate balance between discipline and compassion, rigidity and flexibility, public duty and private need. But Anne's insights also hint at emotional complexities that few outsiders could imagine. She observes that the private dynamics between her parents carried subtle tensions, unspoken disagreements, quiet irritations, and occasional frustrations that never reached the public eye. Separate bedrooms allowed these tensions to dissipate naturally, without escalation, creating a silent harmony that made decades of coexistence possible. This is the nuanced truth behind the sleeping arrangements, a truth shaped by human psychology, personality, and the unique pressures of royalty. By the end of Chapter 6, one realization emerges clearly. The separation was not scandal, nor was it a reflection of dislike. It was strategy, adaptation, and emotional intelligence, viewed through the eyes of a daughter who understood her family better than anyone outside the palace. Anne's perspective transforms a simple curiosity, the choice of bedrooms, into a profound insight into relationships, personality, and the art of coexistence under extraordinary circumstances. And yet, even with Anne's observations, questions remain. What other behaviors, habits, or quirks contributed to the private tension? How did Elizabeth manage the delicate balance between her husband's demands, her own needs, and the public's expectations? And what moments of revelation, perhaps hidden from and herself, lay just beyond the walls of the bedroom, waiting to be uncovered? The next chapter promises to dive even deeper into these secrets, exploring candid stories, anecdotes from staff, and private observations that illuminate the emotional landscape behind Buckingham Palace doors. And what comes next will reveal the first truly startling, never-before-told moments that illuminate the complex marriage of Elizabeth and Philip. A marriage shaped not just by duty, but by personality, compromise, and human emotion. The life of a royal family is often imagined as a seamless blend of elegance, ceremony, and unshakable composure. But behind the glittering facades and meticulously staged photographs lies a reality defined by human emotion, personality clashes, and moments of tension that never make it into public accounts. For Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth, private conflicts were rarely explosive, yet subtly pervasive, shaping decisions like the choice to maintain separate bedrooms, a decision that, for decades, intrigued the public while remaining largely unexplained. One of the most revealing aspects of palace life is how protocol intersects with personal preference. Philip, trained in naval discipline and accustomed to hierarchical order, viewed the world through the lens of precision and routine. Every detail mattered, from the alignment of furniture to the timing of meals and the cadence of conversation. Elizabeth, as monarch, carried the weight of duty alongside the demands of family, requiring a balance of firmness, patience, and emotional intelligence. In this environment, even minor disagreements could carry disproportionate weight, subtly influencing domestic routines and personal arrangements. Staff anecdotes illuminate these tensions. Former aides describe moments when Philip's expectations clashed with Elizabeth's approach to life within the palace. One story recalls an evening when a minor adjustment to the Queen's workspace, a simple relocation of papers, elicited a quietly stern reaction from the Duke. While no confrontation occurred, the emotional undertone was unmistakable, signaling the friction that could arise from differing priorities and habits. These small conflicts, observed day after day, contributed to the establishment of private boundaries, including the maintenance of separate bedrooms. Elizabeth's response to these situations demonstrates her diplomatic acumen. She recognized that harmony in a household under constant scrutiny required compromise, empathy, and foresight. Separate sleeping arrangements were one of many strategies employed to mitigate tension without undermining public perception. By retreating to separate rooms, both Elizabeth and Philip could preserve dignity, manage personality clashes, and maintain equilibrium, a practical solution that allowed the marriage to endure over decades. Princess Anne's observations further clarify the emotional dynamics at play. Growing up with a father known for his exacting nature and a mother who balanced authority with subtle negotiation and witnessed firsthand the nuances of conflict management, she saw how minor irritations, unspoken preferences, and private disagreements could shape the rhythm of daily life. Separate bedrooms, from her perspective, were a natural extension of these dynamics, a protective buffer that allowed personalities to coexist without confrontation, while preserving the image of marital harmony essential to the monarchy. Yet these private conflicts were not limited to minor irritations or personal preferences. Staff accounts hint at moments of genuine emotional friction. One long-serving housekeeper recalls observing Philip's impatience with procedural delays, often paired with Elizabeth's quiet insistence on maintaining decorum and fairness. These moments, though fleeting, revealed the underlying tension that shaped household routines. Separate sleeping arrangements became a practical solution, enabling both individuals to manage stress, maintain autonomy, and navigate personality differences without disrupting the overall harmony of the palace. The human element is crucial to understanding these dynamics. Philip was not unkind or malicious. He was exacting, disciplined, and occasionally brusque. Elizabeth was not distant or indifferent. She was pragmatic, empathetic, and strategically minded. The separate bedrooms reflected the interplay of these personalities, a balance between control and compromise, rigidity and flexibility, duty and personal need. They were not a symptom of failure, but a demonstration of adaptive intelligence, a way to ensure the long-term stability of the marriage while respecting individual boundaries. Even the most mundane details of the bedrooms carried emotional significance. Staff recount how Philip preferred certain lighting, room temperatures, and arrangements, while Elizabeth had her own preferences. These habits, seemingly trivial, underscored the importance of personal space and autonomy within the marriage. Separate bedrooms allowed each partner to manage their environment, preserve emotional comfort, and reduce opportunities for friction. A strategy that speaks volumes about the psychology of long-term relationships, particularly under extreme public scrutiny.